The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Redemption Creek, a frontier town that had sprouted up like a weed in the harsh soil of the American West. The year was 1873, and the air hung thick with the smell of horse sweat, unwashed bodies, and the ever-present dust that coated everything in this God-forsaken place. Clara Bennett stood on the crude wooden platform in the center of town, her wrists bound with rough rope that chafed against her delicate skin. Her once fine blue traveling dress, purchased with such hope back in Philadelphia, was now torn and stained with dirt and dried blood. 3 weeks ago, she had been a respectable young woman of 22, traveling west with a wagon train to start a new life as a schoolteacher in California. Now, she was merchandise. "Gentlemen, what we have here is prime stock." The auctioneer, a greasy man named Silas Burke, grabbed Clara's chin and forced her face up for the crowd to see. Young, healthy, and untouched. She'll make some lucky man a fine addition to his household. The crowd of men pressed closer, their eyes roving over Clara like she was a prize mare. She could smell the whiskey on their breath, see the tobacco stains on their teeth as they grinned and called out crude suggestions. Her stomach churned with revulsion and terror. "Let me go," Clara suddenly cried out, finding her voice after days of shocked silence. "This is illegal. I'm an American citizen. You can't sell people." Burke's hand cracked across her face, sending her stumbling. "Shut your mouth, girl. Ain't nobody here cares about your citizenship. You're property now, and property don't speak unless spoken to." The crowd laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that made Clara's skin crawl. She looked desperately around, searching for one sympathetic face, one person who might help her, but she saw only leering grins and calculating stares. "Let's start the bidding at $50, Burke called out. "60, shouted a fat man in a stained vest. 75, this from a younger man with cruel eyes and a scar running down his cheek. Clara's knees shook as the bidding continued. She thought of her parents back in Philadelphia, who had been so proud when she'd announced her plans to bring education to the frontier. They'd never know what had become of their daughter. The Comanche raid on the wagon train had left no other survivors. $100, the scarred man, who Clara had heard someone called Jed Hawkins, stepped forward with a predatory smile. And worth every penny for a pretty little thing like that. Clara's courage suddenly flared. If she was going to be sold like cattle, she wouldn't go quietly. With a desperate surge of strength, she wrenched away from Burke's grip and tried to leap from the platform. The crowd erupted in shouts and laughter as she hit the dirt hard. Scrambling to her feet despite her bound hands, she'd made it perhaps 10 feet before strong hands seized her arms, dragging her back. "Feisty one, ain't she?" someone called out. "That'll cost extra to break." Burke's face was red with fury as they hauled her back onto the platform. His fist connected with her stomach, doubling her over as she gasped for air. "Try that again, and I'll take a whip to you right here for everyone to see." Clara's eyes blurred with tears of pain and humiliation as they forced her upright again. This was it. Then, this was how her life would end. Not in death, which seemed almost merciful now, but in a kind of living death as some man's property. 100 going once, Burke called out, eager to finish the sale after her attempted escape. Going twice. $500. The voice was quiet, but carried clearly across the square. Every head turned to locate its source. Clara blinked through her tears to see a tall man stepping forward from the back of the crowd. He wore the typical attire of a cattleman, worn leather chaps, a dust-covered shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. What she could see of his face was weathered by sun and wind, with several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. The crowd parted before him like he was Moses at the Red Sea. There was something about the way he moved, controlled, deliberate, that commanded respect, or perhaps it was fear. 500, Burke sputtered. Did you say 500? The man, someone whispered his name, was Jake Morrison. reached the platform and pulled out a leather pouch heavy with coins. "You heard me. $500. Gold. Unless someone wants to bid higher." The square fell silent. $500 was a fortune. More than most men saw in 2 years of hard labor. Even Hawkins, who'd been so eager moments before, stepped back with a scowl. "Well, that is..." Burke seemed at a loss. He'd clearly expected to make a tidy profit, but not this much. "Sold to Mr. Morrison for $500. Jake counted out the coins with methodical precision while Clara stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Why would anyone pay such an astronomical sum for her? What kind of fate awaited her now? When the transaction was complete, Jake stepped onto the platform, up close. Clara could see his eyes, a startling blue-green, like sage leaves after rain. There was something in them she couldn't quite read, not cruelty, like she'd seen in Hawkins's gaze, something else entirely. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly, his voice rough but not unkind. Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Jake produced a knife and cut the ropes binding her wrists. The relief was immediate, blood flowing back into her numb fingers. He shrugged off his duster coat and draped it around her shoulders, covering her torn dress. "Come on," he said simply, taking her elbow with a surprisingly gentle grip. As they descended from the platform, Clara heard the whispers following them like dust devils. $500 for a woman. Morrison must be either crazy or desperate. Wonder how long before she tries to run from him, too. That's if Hawkins don't steal her first. Clara kept her head down as Jake led her through the crowd. She could feel Hawkins's eyes boring into her back, could sense his fury at losing his prize. This wasn't over. She knew. Men like him didn't forget being outbid. Jake's horse, a solid bay gelding, waited at the hitching post. He helped her mount first, then swung up behind her. Clara tensed at his proximity, but he simply gathered the reins, his arms creating a protective cage around her without actually touching more than necessary. As they rode out of Redemption Creek, Clara's mind reeled with the events of the past hour. She'd gone from wagon train traveler to captive to... What was she now? The words of the crowd echoed in her mind, taking on an almost prophetic quality. The virgin tried to flee the auction block until the cowboy's bid made her his forever. Forever. The words settled over her like a shroud. She'd escaped one fate, only to face another unknown one. As the ramshackle buildings of the town fell behind them and the vast expanse of prairie opened up ahead, Clara wondered if she'd simply traded one form of captivity for another. The man behind her, Jake Morrison, her owner. The word made her sick, rode in silence, his presence both protective and imprisoning. $500. The sum staggered her. What could he possibly want that was worth such a fortune? As they rode into the wilderness, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon, Clara Bennett realized her old life was truly dead. Whatever lay ahead, whoever this silent cowboy was and whatever his intentions, she would have to find a way to survive. She'd already learned that in the Wild West. Survival often came at a price she'd never imagined paying. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, beautiful and terrifying in its vastness. And Clara, wrapped in a stranger's coat and carried away from one nightmare toward an uncertain future, could only hold tight to the last shred of hope that somewhere in this harsh land, she might yet find her freedom again. They rode for hours without speaking, the rhythmic movement of the horse and the vast emptiness of the prairie creating an almost dreamlike quality to Clara's exhaustion. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Now, each passing mile only took her further from any hope of rescue or escape. Jake Morrison finally reined in his horse near a small cluster of cottonwood trees beside a nearly dry creek bed. The spot offered minimal shelter, but it was better than the open prairie. Clara had learned during her weeks of captivity that even small mercies were worth noting. "We'll camp here for the night," Jake said, his first words since leaving Redemption Creek. He dismounted with practiced ease, then reached up to help her down. Clara hesitated, her body stiff from hours in the saddle and fear of what might come next, but her legs were too weak to resist, and she allowed him to lift her down. His hands were careful, immediately releasing her once her feet touched the ground. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a fallen log. "I'll see to the horse." Clara sank onto the makeshift seat, watching warily as he unsaddled the bay and rubbed it down with handfuls of dry grass. His movements were efficient, gentle with the animal. She'd learned to judge men by how they treated their horses, and this small observation offered a glimmer of hope. Jake set up camp with the same quiet efficiency. He gathered dried buffalo chips and kindling, starting a small fire as darkness began to creep across the prairie. From his saddlebags, he produced a coffee pot, some hardtack, and dried beef. "When did you last eat?" he asked, glancing at her as he set the coffee to boil. Clara tried to remember. The slavers who'd held her after the Comanche raid had given her just enough food and water to keep her alive and marketable. 2 days ago, I think, maybe 3. Jake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He handed her a piece of hardtack and some beef. "Go slow. Your stomach won't handle too much at once." The simple food tasted like a feast to Clara's starved body. She forced herself to eat slowly, as he'd advised, while Jake busied himself with the camp. He laid out 2 bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, making his intentions clear without words. "There's a canteen in the saddlebag," he said. "Help yourself." Clara found the water and drank carefully, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat. As she did, she studied Jake Morrison from beneath her lashes. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with the lean, hard build of a man who worked cattle for a living. His face, now visible with his hat set aside, bore the marks of a difficult life sun-weathered skin, a thin scar along his jawline, and those startling blue-green eyes that seemed to hold depths of something she couldn't name. "Why?" the word escaped before she could stop it. Jake looked up from the fire. "Why what?" "Why did you buy me $500? That's a fortune." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost lost in the crackle of the fire. "You reminded me of someone." "Who?" "My wife." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. "Sarah. She's been gone 3 years now, along with our daughter. Fever took them both while I was away on a cattle drive." Clara's throat tightened. She hadn't expected this genuine grief in his voice, not the possessive greed she'd anticipated. "She had hair like yours," Jake continued. "Same color, like wheat in the sun, and the way you tried to run." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Sarah would have done the same. Never could abide being caged." "Then why cage me?" Clara asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Jake's eyes met hers across the fire. "Would you have preferred Hawkins or Burke keeping you for himself?" The question hit like cold water. No, she wouldn't have preferred that fate, but that didn't mean she was grateful for this one. "I don't expect anything from you," Jake said suddenly. "You'll work at my ranch, help with the house and such. Fair labor for the money paid. When you've worked off the debt, you're free to go wherever you want." "Work off $500. Clara couldn't hide her disbelief. "That would take years." "Then it takes years," Jake shrugged. "Better than the alternative." Clara wrapped his coat tighter around herself, trying to process this unexpected turn. "And if I try to run?" "Where would you go?" His question was practical, not threatening. "Nearest town is Redemption Creek, and you've seen what waits for you there. Fort Laramie is 100 miles north, through Sioux territory. You wouldn't make it 10 miles alone." He was right, and they both knew it. Clara was trapped as surely as if he'd kept her in chains. "I'm not a man who forces himself on women," Jake added quietly. "You'll have your own room, Privacy. All I ask is honest work and that you don't try anything foolish that'll get us both killed.
Why should I believe you?
No reason you should. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, offering her one. Trust is earned, not bought, but I give you my word for whatever that's worth to you. Clara accepted the coffee, its bitter warmth spreading through her chest. They sat in silence as full darkness settled over the prairie. The stars emerged in breathtaking abundance, and coyotes began their nightly chorus in the distance. "Tell me about your family," Jake said unexpectedly, before all this. Clara hesitated. She'd built walls around those memories to protect herself from the pain, but something about the darkness and the fire and this strange, quiet man made her want to speak. "My father was a clockmaker in Philadelphia," she began slowly. "My mother taught piano. They saved for years to send me to normal school so I could become a teacher." Her voice caught. "They were so proud when I got the position in California. Said I was bringing civilization to the frontier." "They sound like good people." They were. Clara wiped at her eyes. "I was supposed to write when I arrived. They'll never know what happened to me." "You could write them now. I'll see it gets mailed from Fort Laramie." Clara looked at him in surprise. "You do that?" "Why wouldn't I?" She had no answer for that. Everything about Jake Morrison defied her expectations. She'd prepared herself for brutality, for degradation, not for this odd kindness that left her more unsettled than cruelty would have. "Best get some sleep," Jake said, banking the fire. "We've got 2 more days of hard riding ahead." Clara lay down on the bedroll, fully clothed, still wrapped in his coat, despite her exhaustion. Sleep wouldn't come. Every sound made her tense. The wind in the grass, the distant howl of wolves, the soft breathing of the man across the fire. "Miss Bennett," Jake's voice came softly through the darkness. "Yes, I'm sorry about what happened to you. No one deserves that." Clara squeezed her eyes shut against sudden tears. It was the first time since her capture that anyone had acknowledged her as a person rather than property. Such a small thing, but it threatened to shatter the brittle shell she'd built around her heart. "Thank you," she whispered. Soon Jake's breathing deepened into sleep, but Clara remained awake, staring at the stars. She thought about Sarah Morrison, who couldn't abide being caged. Had Jake bought her as some twisted attempt to replace his dead wife? Or was it really just misplaced kindness, saving her from a worse fate? Either way, Clara knew she had to be careful. This unexpected gentleness could be more dangerous than outright cruelty. It would be too easy to let her guard down, to start believing she was safe. But she'd learned the hard way that safety was an illusion in this wild country. As a shooting star streaked across the sky, Clara made herself a promise. She would survive this. Whatever it took, she would work off this debt, reclaim her freedom, and someday, somehow, she would find her way back to the life that had been stolen from her. The coyotes sang their wild songs to the moon, and Clara Bennett finally slept, dreaming of clockwork and piano music and a home she might never see again. 3 days later, they crested a low rise, and Clara got her first glimpse of Morrison Ranch. It wasn't what she'd expected. The main house was modest but solid, built of logs and rough-sawn lumber with a stone chimney. A barn stood to one side, its red paint faded and peeling. Beyond that were a few outbuildings, corrals for horses, and a small garden plot that had clearly been neglected. "It's not much," Jake said, perhaps reading disappointment in her silence. "But it's home." As they rode closer, Clara noticed other signs of abandonment. The garden fence was broken in places, weeds choking what might have once been neat rows of vegetables. The windows of the house were dusty, and the porch sagged slightly at one corner. This was a place that had been loved once, then left to slowly decay. Jake helped her dismount at the front porch. "Come on, I'll show you inside." The interior was much like the exterior sturdy bones, but showing neglect. Dust coated every surface. Cobwebs draped the corners, The main room held a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with 4 chairs, and a few other pieces of simple furniture. Everything spoke of a home that had been frozen in time. "Kitchen's through there," Jake said, gesturing to a doorway. "Your room will be upstairs. There are 2, you can take the one at the end of the hall." Clara climbed the narrow stairs, each step creaking under her weight. The hallway was dim, lit only by a window at the far end. She passed the first door, Jake's room, she assumed, and opened the second. Her breath caught. This had been a child's room. A small bed with a faded quilt, a wooden rocking horse in the corner, a shelf with a few books and a cloth doll. Dust particles danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. That was Emily's room. Jake's voice came from behind her. She hadn't heard him follow. She was 4 when... He cleared his throat. "You can change things however you like, or take the other room if you prefer." "No," Clara said softly. "This is fine." Jake nodded and retreated downstairs. Clara sat on the small bed, overwhelmed by the weight of grief that permeated this room. She picked up the cloth doll, its button eyes staring blankly. Emily Morrison had played with this doll, had slept in this bed, had looked out this window at the same view Clara now saw, endless prairie stretching to the horizon. Eventually, she roused herself. Sitting here wouldn't change anything. She needed to understand her new situation, and that meant exploring. The kitchen was a disaster. Dirty dishes moldered in a dry sink. The stove was thick with grease and ash. Mouse droppings dotted the shelves. Clara rolled up her sleeves, suddenly grateful for something concrete to do. Physical work would keep her mind off larger worries. She found Jake in the barn, tending to his horse. "I need water," she said. "Lots of it, and soap, if you have any." He looked surprised. "There's a well out back. Pump might need priming. Soap's in the cabinet under the sink." Clara spent the rest of the day attacking the kitchen with a vengeance. She hauled water, scrubbed surfaces, washed dishes, swept floors. The physical labor was exhausting but oddly satisfying. As layers of grime disappeared, the kitchen began to reveal itself, a functional space that had once been the heart of a home. Jake appeared in the doorway as the sun was setting. He stared at the transformation. "You didn't have to do all this today." "I can't cook in filth," Clara replied, wringing out a rag. "And I assume you expect meals as part of my duties." "I've been managing barely from the looks of things." She surveyed her handiwork. "Do you have supplies, flour, salt, anything?" "Some. I go to town once a month for provisions." Clara made a mental inventory of what she'd found in the pantry, meager supplies that would need careful stretching. "I'll make a list of what we need." Jake raised an eyebrow. Clara flushed. "What you need? I mean..." That night, she cooked a simple meal of biscuits and beans with the last of some salt pork. It wasn't much, but Jake ate like it was a feast, cleaning his plate twice. "Been a long time since anyone cooked in this kitchen," he said quietly. "Your wife must have been a good cook." "She was good at everything." His voice held that note of grief again. "Garden was hers. She could make anything grow, even in this soil." Clara glanced out the window at the neglected plot. "Would you mind if I tried to restore it? We'll need vegetables." "Do whatever you want." They fell into a pattern over the following days. Clara rose early, made coffee and breakfast. Jake would eat quickly and head out to tend his cattle and horses. She'd spend her days cleaning, one room at a time, uncovering the home that lay beneath 3 years of neglect. The work was hard but purposeful. Every surface scrubbed, every corner cleared of cobwebs felt like a small victory. She found Sarah Morrison's things tucked away, a sewing basket, recipes written in careful script, pressed flowers in a Bible. Each discovery painted a picture of the woman who'd made this house a home. Jake always returned by sunset, dusty and tired. Clara would have supper ready, Simple fare, but hot and filling. They'd eat mostly in silence. Then he'd retreat to the porch while she cleaned up. One evening, she found him there whittling a piece of wood. "What are you making?" "New handle for the garden hoe. The old one's rotted through."
Thank you.
She sat on the opposite end of the porch, maintaining careful distance. "I found seeds in the pantry. They might still be good. Sarah saved them from her best plants each year." He kept his eyes on his work. She had plans for expanding the garden, never got the chance. Clara watched his hands shape the wood with sure strokes. They were gentle hands. She'd learned. She'd seen him calm a spooked horse with just a touch, had watched him tend a calf with infinite patience. "Why haven't you remarried?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Jake's knife stilled. "Never found a reason to—" "Surely there must be women in town who—" "Women in town want a man with prospects. Ranch like this, barely scraping by, isn't much to offer." He resumed whittling. "Besides, wasn't looking to replace what I'd lost. Yet you bought me." He looked at her then, those blue-green eyes unreadable in the fading light. "That was different. You needed help. I had the means to provide it. Simple as that." Nothing about this situation was simple, Clara thought, but she didn't argue. She was beginning to understand Jake Morrison, a man who'd wrapped his grief around him like armor, going through the motions of living without really being alive.
I'll start on the garden tomorrow,
she said, rising to go inside. "Clara." It was the first time he'd used her given name. She turned back. "The clothes in the trunk in your room, they were Sarah's. You're about the same size. No sense them going to waste." Clara's throat tightened.
Are you sure?
She wouldn't want them rotting away. Sarah was practical like that. That night, Clara opened the trunk at the foot of the bed. Inside were dresses, skirts, blouses, simple but well-made garments. She held up a blue calico dress, noting the careful stitches, the way it had been folded with lavender sachets to keep it fresh. Wearing a dead woman's clothes should have felt wrong, macabre even, but as Clara tried on the dress, she felt oddly comforted. It fit well, and for the first time in over a month, she felt human again. Not property, not a captive, but a woman in a dress that smelled faintly of lavender and long-ago dreams. She looked at her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. The woman staring back at her was thinner than before, her face marked by experiences no one should endure. But she was alive. She was surviving. Tomorrow she would plant seeds in Sarah Morrison's garden. She would coax life from the neglected soil, bring beauty back to this broken place. It wasn't the life she'd planned, wasn't the future she'd dreamed of, but it was life nonetheless. As she lay in Emily Morrison's bed, wearing Sarah Morrison's nightgown, Clara realized she was no longer just surviving. She was beginning to live again, one small act at a time. The house was sharing its secrets with her, welcoming her into its grief and its memories. And Jake, he remained a mystery, a man who'd paid a fortune to save a stranger, who asked nothing but honest work in return. Clara didn't trust him, couldn't afford to trust anyone, but she was beginning to respect him. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, but for the first time since her capture, Clara didn't flinch at the sound. She was safe here, at least for now, and tomorrow, she would plant a garden. Word of Jake Morrison's unusual purchase spread through the territory like wildfire through dry grass. Within 2 weeks, riders began appearing on the horizon, slowing their horses to stare at the ranch before moving on. Clara learned to recognize the signs of gossip seekers, the way they'd lean in their saddles, hoping for a glimpse of the woman who'd cost $500. "Don't let them bother you," Jake said one morning, watching her tense as another group of cowboys rode by. People need something to talk about. But it did bother her. Every stare felt like being back on that auction block, reduced to an object of curiosity and speculation. She threw herself harder into her work, as if she could somehow prove her worth through gleaming floors and fresh-baked bread. The real trouble came on a sweltering afternoon 3 weeks after her arrival. Clara was in the garden, coaxing life from the seeds she'd planted, when the sound of approaching horses made her look up. 3 riders were coming fast, dust billowing behind them. Her blood turned cold when she recognized the lead rider, Jed Hawkins. Clara dropped her hoe and ran for the house, heart pounding. She'd barely made it to the porch when the men reined in their horses. "Well, well," Hawkins drawled, his scarred face splitting into an unpleasant grin. "If it ain't Morrison's $500 woman." His companions laughed, the sound harsh and predatory. Clara gripped the porch rail, fighting the urge to flee inside. Running would only encourage them.
Mr. Morrison isn't here,
she managed, proud when her voice didn't shake. "You'll need to come back another time." Now that's unfriendly. Hawkins dismounted, moving with the lazy confidence of a man who expected others to fear him. "Here I came all this way to make Morrison a business proposition." "What kind of proposition?" Jake's voice came from behind Clara. She hadn't heard him approach, but suddenly he was there, rifle held casually but ready. Hawkins's smile widened. "There you are. Morrison. Was just telling your woman here how I've been thinking. $500 is a lot of money for one man to spend. My money, my business." True, but I'm a generous man. I'll give you $600 for her. That's $100 profit for just a few weeks' investment." Clara's stomach churned. They were haggling over her like she was livestock. "Not for sale," Jake said flatly. "Everything's for sale at the right price. $700. "You deaf! Hawkins, I said no." Hawkins's friendly mask slipped, revealing the cruel man beneath. "You think you're better than the rest of us? Morrison buying her like some kind of savior. We all know what you really wanted." Jake's rifle shifted slightly. "Get off my property." "Or what you'll shoot me in front of your precious lady," Hawkins laughed. "I don't think so. You always were too soft." One of Hawkins's men had been circling around, and Clara saw him too late. His hand shot out, grabbing her arm and yanking her off the porch. She cried out, stumbling, and suddenly everything happened very fast. Jake's rifle swung toward the man holding Clara. "Let her go! Tom!" "Just having a look at what costs $500, Tom said, his grip tightening painfully on Clara's arm. "Don't see nothing special." "I won't ask again." Clara could feel the tension ratcheting higher, violence hovering like a thunderstorm about to break. She forced herself to go limp, not fighting Tom's grip. Any struggle might spark the confrontation into something deadly. "Tell you what," Hawkins said, hand hovering near his pistol. "How about we let the lady decide you want to stay here with Morrison, sweetheart, or come with me where you'll be properly appreciated?" "I'm staying here," Clara said clearly. "You sure about that man who buys a woman might do anything to her? Least with me. You'd know what to expect." Jake's voice was deadly quiet. "Tom, you've got 3 seconds to let her go. 1. "Jake, don't be stupid." 2. Tom released Clara so fast she stumbled. She scrambled back to the porch, legs shaking. 3. Jake hadn't moved, but something in his stance made all 3 men step back. "Now get out. Don't come back." Hawkins mounted his horse, but his eyes never left Clara. "This ain't over. Morrison. Man can't keep something that valuable without consequences." They rode off in a cloud of dust and threats. Jake didn't lower his rifle until they were specks on the horizon. "You all right?" he asked, finally turning to Clara. She nodded, rubbing her arm where bruises were already forming. "They'll be back." "Probably." Jake studied her with those unsettling eyes. "You handled that well. Most women would have panicked." "Panic doesn't help." Clara straightened her spine. "What do we do now?" They're not going to leave me alone. That makes it my problem too." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can you shoot?" "No." "Then that's what we do. Come on." He led her behind the barn where he'd set up targets, old cans and bottles on a fence rail. From a locked cabinet, he produced a smaller rifle and a Colt .45 revolver. "We'll start with the rifle. It's easier for beginners." He demonstrated how to hold it, how to sight down the barrel. "The kick will surprise you at first. Don't fight it." Clara's first shot went wild, the recoil nearly knocking her down. Her shoulder ached and her ears rang. "Again," Jake said patiently. The afternoon dissolved into the rhythm of instruction. Load, aim, squeeze the trigger, absorb the kick. Jake was a good teacher, calm and precise, adjusting her stance with brief, impersonal touches. Slowly, Clara's shots grew more accurate. "Why are you doing this?" she asked during a break, her shoulder throbbing. "Teaching me to defend myself means I could turn these guns on you." "Could you—" He seemed genuinely curious. "Could you shoot a man—" "Clara." She thought about Tom's bruising grip, Hawkins's leering face, the auction block.
To save my life, yes?
"Then you need to know how." He handed her the revolver. "This is harder, less range, but better in close quarters." The pistol was heavier than she expected, the grip almost too large for her hand, but there was something about the weight of it, the potential it represented, that made her feel less helpless. They practiced until the sun touched the horizon and Clara's arms ached from holding the weapon steady. She'd managed to hit more targets than she'd missed, which Jake deemed acceptable for a first lesson. "We'll practice every day," he said, locking the guns away, "until it becomes natural." At supper, Clara could barely lift her fork, her arms trembling from the afternoon's exertion. Jake noticed. "Sore." "A little." He disappeared into his room, returning with a jar of liniment. "This helps." He set it on the table between them, not offering to apply it, maintaining the careful boundaries that defined their strange relationship. Later, alone in her room, Clara rubbed the sharp-smelling salve into her aching shoulders. Through her window, she could see Jake on the porch, rifle across his knees. Keeping watch, protecting his investment, she thought, then felt ungrateful for the cynical assessment. The next day, between her morning chores and afternoon shooting practice, Clara ventured into town with Jake for supplies. She wore one of Sarah's bonnets, hoping to avoid recognition, but it was futile. Whispers followed them through the general store. "That's her." $500. Wonder how long before she runs off. Or before someone takes her. Clara kept her chin high, selecting flour and salt while pretending not to hear. But at the counter, Mrs. Paulson, the store owner's wife, couldn't resist commenting. "You're the Bennett girl," she said, her tone making it clear what she thought of Clara's situation. "From the auction?" "Yes, ma'am." Must be difficult, adjusting to circumstances. Clara met the woman's pitying gaze steadily. "Mr. Morrison has been very kind." "Kind?" Mrs. Paulson sniffed. "That's one word for it." Jake appeared at Clara's elbow, setting ammunition on the counter. "Problem, Mrs. Paulson." The woman's face flushed. "No problem at all. Mr. Morrison, that'll be $8.40. Outside, loading supplies into the wagon. Clara's hands shook with suppressed anger. "They all think—" "I know what they think." Jake's voice was steady. "Question is, do you care? Don't you? Stopped caring what people think the day I buried my family." He helped her onto the wagon seat. "Only opinions that matter are from people who matter. Rest is just noise." On the ride home, Clara studied him from under her bonnet. This man who'd saved her from a terrible fate, who was teaching her to defend herself, who maintained such careful distance while still protecting her. What did he want? What was his true purpose? "I'm not her, you know," she said suddenly. "I'm not Sarah." Jake's hands tightened on the reins. "I know that." "Do you? Because sometimes I catch you looking at me like—" "Like what?" Like you're seeing a ghost. Jake was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, maybe I am. Maybe that's all any of us are. Ghosts trying to find our way back to being alive. That evening, after another shooting lesson that left her muscles screaming, Clara sat at Sarah's sewing machine, altering more of the dead woman's dresses to fit her slightly smaller frame. Each stitch felt like both a trespass and a promise to honor what came before while building something new. Jake cleaned his guns at the kitchen table, the familiar ritual seeming to calm him. They worked in companionable silence. Two damaged people learning to exist in the same space. Hawkins meant what he said. Clara said eventually, "He'll be back." "I know. Are you worried?" Jake looked up from his work. "Are you?" Clara considered the question. A month ago, she'd have been terrified. "Now, no, not anymore." Something shifted in Jake's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. "Good. Fear makes people stupid. You're not stupid." Clara. It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd given her. Clara bent back to her sewing to hide her flush of pleasure. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the darkening prairie. But inside the house, in the warm circle of lamplight, two people were slowly learning to trust themselves, each other, and the possibility that even in this harsh land, broken things could be mended. The drought came slowly at first, like a thief in the night. Clara noticed it in small things, the morning dew disappearing earlier each day, the grass crunching underfoot where it should have been soft, the worried crease between Jake's brows as he scanned the cloudless sky. By midsummer, the situation had turned dire. The creek that gave Redemption Creek its name had dwindled to a muddy trickle. The garden Clara had coaxed to life began to wither despite her careful watering from their dwindling well. Most alarming of all, the cattle grew gaunt, their ribs showing through their hides as they searched for grass that no longer existed. "We're going to lose them," Jake said one evening, staring out at his herd. "Another 2 weeks without rain, and they'll start dying." Clara set down the shirt she was mending. In the 2 months since her arrival, she'd learned to read Jake's moods, the subtle shifts that indicated worry, exhaustion, or the rare moments of contentment. Tonight, she saw something she'd never seen before, defeat. "There must be something we can do," she said. "Can't make it rain." He rubbed his face, dust and sweat streaking his skin. "Could sell them now, take the loss, but prices are rock bottom with everyone else doing the same." "What about water? There must be water somewhere." Jake laughed bitterly. "Sure, up in the mountains. There's springs that never run dry. But that's 3 days' ride through Comanche territory. And no way to get water back even if we made it." Clara stood, an idea forming. What if we didn't bring water back? What if we took the cattle to the water? Drive the herd through Indian territory? Jake shook his head. "That's suicide." "So is staying here watching them die." They stared at each other across the kitchen table. Clara saw the moment Jake realized she was serious. "You don't know what you're suggesting," he said quietly. "The Comanche, they're the ones who attacked your wagon train." Clara's hands clenched involuntarily. She still woke screaming some nights, reliving that horror. But she'd learned something about fear in these past months. It was a luxury she couldn't afford. "I know exactly what I'm suggesting," she said, "and I'm going with you." "Absolutely not. You can't drive the herd alone. And who'll watch the ranch?" "I'll hire men." "With what money you spent everything on me, remember?" The words hung between them. Harsh but true. Jake's jaw tightened. "This isn't your problem, Clara." "Isn't it?" She gestured around the kitchen she'd made spotless, the mended clothes, the garden she'd planted. "I live here too. I work this land. If the ranch fails, what happens to me?" Jake didn't answer, but they both knew. Without the ranch, he couldn't protect her. She'd be vulnerable again, prey for men like Hawkins. "I can help," Clara pressed.
I can ride now. I can shoot. Let me help.
Jake studied her for a long moment. The lamplight caught the silver threads in his dark hair, the lines carved by sun and sorrow. If we do this,
And I'm not saying yes. You do exactly what I say. No arguments.
agreed. 3 days later, they set out at dawn. Jake had managed to keep 50 head of cattle, the strongest ones. The rest he'd sold for a pittance to a passing buyer. Clara rode Sarah's mare, a gentle paint horse who'd accepted her with patient resignation. The first day passed peacefully enough. They kept the cattle moving steadily northwest, toward the dark line of mountains on the horizon. Clara learned the rhythm of herding, how to anticipate the cattle's movements, when to press them forward and when to let them rest. At night, they took turns standing watch. Clara wrapped herself in a blanket against the surprising cold of the prairie night, rifle across her knees, listening to the cattle's restless movements and Jake's quiet breathing. "You're thinking too loud," Jake said on the second night, startling her. "I thought you were asleep." He sat up, hair disheveled. "Hard to sleep when someone's worrying that hard next to you." "I'm not worried." "Liar." But there was warmth in his voice. "What is it?" Clara hesitated.
I was thinking about Sarah.
Would she have done this, ridden into danger for the ranch? In a heartbeat, Jake's voice softened with memory. "Sarah was the bravest person I knew. Came out here with me when everyone said it was foolish. Gave birth to Emily with just me and a neighbor woman to help. Never complained, even when things got hard."
You loved her very much.
"More than I knew was possible." He was quiet for a moment. "Thought that part of me died with her, but lately—" He didn't finish, but Clara felt something shift in the air between them. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, unsure whether the shiver was from cold or something else entirely. On the third day, they saw the smoke. 3 columns rising in the distance, too regular to be natural. Jake reined in his horse, face grim. "Comanche," he said. "Signaling. They know we're here." Clara's mouth went dry, but she forced her voice steady. "What do we do?" "Keep moving. Show fear and we're done." They pushed the cattle harder, angling toward a narrow canyon Jake knew led to the mountain springs. The smoke followed them, always maintaining the same distance, a constant reminder they were being watched. That night, Jake insisted on no fire. They ate cold biscuits and dried meat, the cattle milling nervously around them. "They're deciding," Jake explained quietly, "whether we're worth the trouble. And if they decide we are—" Jake checked his rifle for the 100th time. "Then we find out if all that target practice paid off." Clara dozed fitfully, starting at every sound. Near dawn, she woke to find Jake's hand on her shoulder. "Company," he whispered. 3 riders sat motionless on a ridge, silhouetted against the lightning sky, even at a distance. Clara could see the feathers in their hair, the weapons they carried. Her hands trembled as she reached for her rifle. "No," Jake said softly. "Just watch." The riders observed them for long minutes. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they wheeled their horses and vanished over the ridge.
Why didn't they attack?
Clara asked, heart still racing. Maybe they decided 50 scrawny cattle weren't worth it. Maybe they respect courage. Maybe they're waiting for us to get careless. Jake shrugged. Doesn't matter. We keep moving. By afternoon, they reached the canyon. The temperature dropped as the walls rose around them, providing blessed shade. And then Clara heard it, the sound of running water. The spring was everything Jake had promised. Clear, cold water bubbled from a crack in the rock, forming a pool before trickling away down the canyon. The cattle, smelling water, needed no urging. They crowded forward, drinking deeply. Clara slipped from her horse, kneeling beside the pool. The water was so cold it made her teeth ache, but she'd never tasted anything so wonderful. She splashed her face, washing away days of dust and fear. We made it, She breathed. We did. Jake knelt beside her, cupping water in his hands. Their shoulders brushed, and neither pulled away. They spent 3 days at the spring, letting the cattle drink their fill and graze on the sparse but nutritious mountain grass. Clara washed their clothes in the pool, spreading them on sun-warmed rocks to dry. It felt almost like a holiday, a respite from the constant struggle of ranch life. On the second night, sitting by their small fire, Jake surprised her. That was a brave thing you did, he said. Coming here, most women would have stayed at the ranch. Most women weren't bought for $500. Clara replied, I had more to lose. Is that really why you came? Clara considered the question. Why had she insisted on this dangerous journey? Yes, protecting her situation was part of it, but watching Jake face the drought alone, seeing his desperation. No, she admitted. That's not the only reason. Jake looked at her across the fire, those blue-green eyes reflecting the flames. Clara, A howl cut through the night, followed by another, wolves, and close. The cattle stirred restlessly. Jake grabbed his rifle. Stay by the fire, they're after the calves. But Clara was already moving, her own weapon in hand. They stood back to back, scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. Eyes gleamed in the shadows. 1 pair, 2, more. A wolf darted forward, trying for a young calf. Jake's rifle cracked, and the predator tumbled. Another came from Clara's side. She forced herself to breathe, to aim, to squeeze the trigger like Jake had taught her. The wolf yelped and fled, wounded. The pack circled, testing. But the gunfire and the humans' determined defense eventually drove them off. Clara's hands shook as she lowered her rifle. You all right? Jake asked. Yes, she was surprised to find it was true. I'm all right. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. Yes, you are. The journey back was easier. The cattle, strengthened by water and food, moved more willingly. The Comanche shadows had disappeared, apparently satisfied the travelers had passed through without taking more than they needed. When they finally crested the rise overlooking the ranch, Clara felt a surge of emotion she couldn't quite name. The buildings looked exactly as they'd left them, weathered, modest, baking under the sun. But somehow, it looked like home. Thank you, Jake said quietly. Couldn't have done it without you. Partners help each other, Clara replied. That's what we are. Isn't it, partners? Jake turned in his saddle to look at her. The desert sun had darkened her skin, bleached gold streaks in her hair. She sat her horse with confidence now, rifle within easy reach. This wasn't the terrified girl from the auction block. This was a woman who'd ridden into danger beside him, who'd stood against wolves and her own fears. Yes, he said, and the word held weight. Partners. As they drove the cattle toward home, Clara felt something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't Jake Morrison's property anymore. If she'd ever truly been, she was Clara Bennett, partner in Morrison Ranch, a woman who'd earned her place through courage and determination. The drought would end eventually. The ranch would survive. And maybe, just maybe, 2 broken people could build something new from the ashes of their losses. The evening after their return from the mountains, Clara was drawing water from the well when Jake approached, hat in hand. The sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, and for a moment he seemed unsure of himself, a rarity for the usually steady rancher. Clara, he began, then stopped, running his fingers along the brim of his hat. I've been thinking. She set down the bucket, wiping her hands on her apron. About what? About what you said. About being partners. He met her eyes. You've more than earned your place here. The debt, consider it paid. Clara's heart stuttered. You mean I'm free to go? You were always free to go. His voice was quiet. I hope you might choose to stay. The words hung between them like morning mist. Clara studied his face, the lines carved by loss and weather, the eyes that had seen too much but still held kindness. She thought of the empty roads that led away from here, the uncertain future that awaited her elsewhere.
Jake Morrison,
she said softly.
are you asking me to stay?
He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the leather and sage that always clung to him. I'm asking for more than that. I'm asking if I might court you, proper-like, the way you deserve. Clara's breath caught.
Jake!
I know I'm not much to offer, a weathered rancher with more past than future. But Clara, these months with you've brought life back to this place, to me. He reached out, tentatively taking her hand. I'm not asking you to be property or payment. I'm asking if you might, in time, be my wife, my true partner. Clara looked down at their joined hands, his rough and calloused, hers bearing their own new marks of hard work.
I'm not Sarah, she whispered.
No, Jake agreed. You're Clara, brave, fierce Clara who stood with me against wolves and drought, who made this empty house a home again. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm.
I don't want Sarah back. I want you.
Clara felt tears prick her eyes.
Yes,
she said simply.
Yes, I'll stay. Yes to all of it.
Jake's smile was like sunrise after a long night. He raised her hand to his lips, the gesture achingly gentle. May I? He asked, leaning closer. Clara nodded, and their lips met in a kiss that was tender and promising, tasting of new beginnings and hard-won hope. When they parted, both were breathless. We should do this right, Jake said. I'll speak to Reverend Mills. Post the banns. A shout from the road cut him off. They turned to see a rider approaching fast, and Clara's newfound happiness curdled to dread as she recognized the scarred face of Jed Hawkins. But he wasn't alone. Behind him rode 6 men, all armed, their intentions clear in their aggressive approach. Get inside, Jake ordered, already moving toward his rifle.
No.
Clara lifted her chin. We face this together. Hawkins reined up just outside the yard, his men spreading out in a semicircle. Morrison, he called. Heard you were back from your little mountain adventure. Jake emerged from the house with his rifle, Clara beside him with her own weapon. State your business. Hawkins. My business? Hawkins laughed. My business is collecting what's mine. You've had your fun playing house, but I've got a legal claim now. He produced a paper from his vest. Bill of sale. Seems Mr. Burke sold me his interest in the girl before he left town.
That's not possible, Clara said. He already sold you to Morrison. Yes, but see, there's some question about whether the sale was legal. You being a free woman and all.
Hawkins's smile was predatory. So, either Morrison pays me what I'm owed, or I take you to the territorial judge. Let him sort out who owns what. No one owns me, Clara stated firmly. That's for the law to decide, and Judge Carter, well, Hawkins shrugged. He's a friend of mine. Reasonable man when properly motivated. Jake cocked his rifle. Get off my land! Or what you'll shoot us all, Hawkins gestured to his men. Even if you could, you'd hang for it. Murder's still murder, even out here. Clara felt the trap closing. Hawkins had planned this carefully, using the law as his weapon. In a fair court, the original sale would be thrown out, but with a corrupt judge. How much? Jake asked through gritted teeth. Well now, the price has gone up. $1,000 should cover it. You know I don't have that. Then I guess we'll be taking the lady with us. Hawkins started to dismount. Wait. Clara stepped forward, ignoring Jake's warning hand on her arm. I have a proposition. Hawkins paused. I'm listening.
Single combat, you and me. If I win, you leave and never come back. If you win,
she swallowed hard.
I'll come willingly.
The yard erupted in surprised exclamations. Hawkins's men laughed, but Hawkins himself studied her with narrowed eyes.
"Clara, no!"
Jake said urgently. She turned to him.
"Trust me,"
she whispered, then louder.
"What's wrong, Mr.
Hawkins,
afraid to fight a woman?"
The laughter died. Hawkins's face darkened.
"You're serious?"
"Completely, unless you're too cowardly to face someone who can fight back." The insult hit its mark. Hawkins dismounted, handing his gun belt to one of his men.
"Fists or weapons?"
"Fists." Clara had been practicing more than shooting with Jake. The long hours of ranch work had strengthened her, and Jake had taught her some basic defensive moves.
"This is ridiculous,"
one of Hawkins's men protested.
"Jed, you can't—" "Shut up!"
Hawkins was rolling up his sleeves.
"The lady wants to fight. We'll fight."
They cleared a space in the yard. Jake gripped Clara's shoulders.
"You don't have to do this."
"Yes, I do." She looked into his worried eyes.
"I'm not property to be bartered over.
I'm a free woman, and I'll prove it." The fight was brutal and quick. Hawkins came at her with contemptuous confidence, expecting an easy victory. Clara ducked his first swing, using his momentum against him, sending him stumbling. The surprise in his eyes was gratifying. But Hawkins was bigger, stronger, and experienced in violence. His second attack connected, sending Clara sprawling. She tasted blood. Heard Jake surge forward, held back by Hawkins's men.
"Stay down, girl,"
Hawkins advised, standing over her. Clara thought of the auction block, of being cargo, of every man who'd looked at her like something to own. She thought of Jake's proposal, of the life they could build together. She swept Hawkins's legs. He went down hard, and Clara was on him, months of suppressed rage giving her strength. She struck him once, twice, before his greater weight threw her off. They rolled in the dust, trading blows. Clara's vision blurred, her body screaming in pain, but she wouldn't yield. When Hawkins pinned her, she bit his arm savagely, used the distraction to drive her knee where it would hurt most. Hawkins howled, rolling away. Clara struggled to her feet, swaying.
"I'm not property,"
she gasped. Hawkins rose too, murderous rage in his eyes. His hand went for the hidden knife in his boot. Jake's rifle cracked. The knife spun from Hawkins's hand.
"Fight's over,"
Jake announced, his weapon trained on Hawkins.
"She won."
"She cheated."
"No more than you did."
Jake's voice was ice.
"Now honor the agreement. Leave. Don't come back."
Hawkins looked between them, at Clara standing bloodied but unbroken, at Jake ready to kill for her. Something shifted in his expression, not acceptance, but calculation. "This isn't over," he said finally. But he mounted his horse, his men following reluctantly. As they rode away, Clara's knees buckled. Jake caught her, lowering her gently to the ground. "That was the most foolish, brave, incredible thing I've ever seen," he said, cradling her against his chest. Clara managed a laugh through split lips.
"Did I mention I can't actually fight?"
"Could have fooled me." He touched her face gently, assessing the damage. "Why? Clara, why risk this?"
"Because I needed to prove it.
To them, to you,
to myself."
She gripped his shirt. "I'm not your property. Jake Morrison, I'm your equal, your partner, your future wife, if the offer still stands." "Always," he promised, pressing his forehead to hers. "Always and forever." They helped each other into the house. Two battered warriors who'd won more than a fight. They'd won the right to choose each other, not from desperation or obligation, but from love. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The drought would break soon, bringing life back to the parched land. And in the Morrison ranch house, two people who'd found each other across impossible odds began planning a future neither had dared dream of. But in the distance, Jed Hawkins rode away with darkness in his heart, already planning his return. The fight was won. But the war for Clara's freedom and their love was far from over. The news of Clara's fight with Hawkins spread through the territory like wildfire. Within a week, it seemed everyone within 50 miles had heard about the woman who'd cost $500 and fought for her own freedom. The reactions were as varied as the people who heard the tale. It started with small visits. Mary Patterson, the minister's wife, arrived first on a Tuesday morning, her buggy laden with what appeared to be half her pantry. "Thought you might need some supplies," she said, eyeing Clara's fading bruises with poorly concealed curiosity. "And perhaps some female company." Clara served tea in Sarah's china, acutely aware of Mrs. Patterson's examining gaze taking in every detail of the house, her appearance, the way Jake's coat hung on the peg by the door. "It must be quite an adjustment," Mrs. Patterson began carefully. "Living here after recent events." "The ranch is a good place," Clara replied evenly. "Mr. Morrison has been nothing but honorable." Of course. The older woman sipped her tea. "Still, people do talk. A young woman, unmarried, living with a bachelor." "We've posted bans," Clara interjected. "The wedding is in 3 weeks." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose. How expeditious. The visits multiplied after that. Some women came with genuine kindness, like Dr. Walsh's wife, who brought ointment for Clara's bruises and stories of her own rough early days in the territory. Others came to gawk and gossip, barely concealing their disapproval behind thin smiles. The worst was Mrs. Cornelius Ashford, wife of the territory's richest rancher. She swept into Clara's kitchen like a queen granting an audience, her silk dress absurdly out of place in the simple room. "My dear," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I've come to offer you a position in my household. As a lady's maid, you'd have proper wages, respectable work, and most importantly, your virtue would be protected." Clara's hands tightened on the coffee pot. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm quite content here." "Content, Mrs." Ashford's laugh was like breaking glass. "My dear girl, you cannot possibly think this arrangement is appropriate. Whatever hold Mr. Morrison has over you, the only hold Jake Morrison has over me is love," Clara said firmly. "We're to be married." "Mrs." Ashford's face flushed. "You actually believe he'll go through with it? Men like Morrison don't marry women like—" She caught herself, but the damage was done. "Women like me." Clara set down the pot carefully, afraid she might throw it. "Women who were captured through no fault of their own, women who survived horrors you can't imagine, or just women who were sold like cattle because this territory allows such barbarism." "I only meant—" "I know exactly what you meant." Clara moved to the door, opening it pointedly. "Thank you for your visit, Mrs. Ashford. Don't feel obligated to repeat it." The woman left in a huff, but her words lingered like smoke. That evening, Clara attacked the garden with unusual vigor, taking out her frustrations on the stubborn weeds. "Want to talk about it?" Jake asked, appearing with his own hoe. "Not particularly." They worked side by side in silence until Clara's anger cooled enough to speak. "She offered me a position as her maid, said you'd never actually marry me." Jake's movement stilled. "And what did you say?" "I threw her out." Clara yanked a particularly deep-rooted weed. Politely, but still. "Good." She looked at him in surprise. "You're not angry. She's an important woman." "She's a bitter woman with too much time and too little compassion." Jake returned to his hoeing. "Besides, I like a woman who fights for what's hers." The next challenge came from an unexpected source. Reverend Mills arrived on Saturday, his usually kind face troubled. "I've had some concerns raised," he began uncomfortably, accepting Clara's offer of coffee. "About the wedding." Jake's expression darkened. "What kind of concerns?" Some members of the congregation feel that perhaps more time should pass to ensure that Miss Bennet is entering this marriage freely, not from obligation or coercion.
3 months ago, I couldn't enter anything freely, Clara said quietly. I was property. Jake gave me back my freedom. Everything I do now, including marrying him, is my choice.
The Reverend shifted awkwardly. I don't doubt that, but there's also the matter of... That is, some question whether you're legally free to marry.
What?
Jake's voice was dangerously low. If the original sale was legal, which some argue it was, given the circumstances, then technically... The Reverend couldn't meet their eyes. Some say Miss Bennet requires her owner's permission to wed. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara felt rage building in her chest, hot and fierce.
I am not property, she said, each word precise. I have never been property. Any law that says otherwise is an abomination.
I agree completely. Reverend Mills hastened to say, I'm only telling you what's being whispered. Judge Carter has been asking questions. Jake and Clara exchanged looks. Judge Carter Hawkins's friend. What do you advise? Jake asked. The Reverend squared his shoulders. I advise that we proceed with the wedding as planned. I'll marry you myself, and let anyone who objects take it up with the Almighty. Clara felt a rush of gratitude.
Thank you.
Don't thank me yet. This Sunday's service might be... interesting. He wasn't wrong. Clara entered the church on Jake's arm to a wave of whispers and stares. Some faces showed support, others curiosity, and a few outright hostility. They took their usual pew, Clara keeping her head high despite feeling like a specimen on display. Reverend Mills preached on compassion and judged not lest ye be judged, his meaning clear. But Clara barely heard him, too aware of the eyes boring into her back, the whispered conversations behind raised fans. After the service, the congregation divided like the Red Sea. Some approached with congratulations on the upcoming wedding. Others pointedly avoided them, pulling their skirts aside as if Clara's past might be contagious. Eleanor Hadley, the banker's daughter, was the boldest of the detractors.
I think it's shameful,
she declared loudly enough for all to hear, parading about as if she were a decent woman. Some of us have standards. Clara started forward, but Jake's hand on her arm stopped her. To her surprise, it was Mary Patterson who spoke up. The only shameful thing here is your lack of Christian charity. Eleanor, the minister's wife said firmly, this young woman has shown more courage and grace than most of us will ever need to. Courage! Eleanor's laugh was ugly. Is that what we're calling it now? Yes, said another voice. Doctor. Walsh's wife stepped forward. I call facing down 7 armed men courage. What would you call it? The crowd stirred uneasily. The story of Clara's fight had grown in the telling, but the core remained. She'd fought for her freedom and won.
I'd call it unladylike,
Eleanor sniffed. No proper woman has ever faced what Clara faced. Jake interjected, his voice carrying the authority of a man not to be crossed. And I'll thank you not to speak of my future wife that way again. Eleanor flushed, but before she could respond, her father appeared. That's enough. Eleanor, we're leaving. As the Hadleys retreated, others began to drift away, the confrontation having satisfied their appetite for drama. Clara found herself surrounded by a small but fierce group of supporters. Don't mind them, Doctor, Walsh's wife said. Small minds always fear what they don't understand.
Thank you,
Clara managed, overwhelmed by the unexpected defense. As they rode home, Clara was quiet, processing the morning's events. It won't be easy, Jake said finally. There will always be those who judge. I know. Clara looked out at the vast prairie. But I'd rather be judged as your wife than pitied as a victim. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jake surprised her. "I've been thinking about the wedding."
Clara's heart sank. "If you want to postpone."
"No." He took her hand. "I want to move it up. This Saturday instead of next, before Hawkins and Judge Carter can cause more trouble."
"Can we do that?" "Reverend Mills will do it. I already asked."
Jake squeezed her hand. "Unless you need more time." Clara thought of Eleanor's sneer, Mrs. Ashford's condescension, the whispers that followed her everywhere. Then she thought of Jake's steady presence, the home they were building, the future they'd chosen. "Saturday," she agreed. "Let them gossip about that." Jake grinned, and for a moment looked younger, almost boyish. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, testing the words. "Clara Morrison."
"It has a nice sound."
Clara admitted, "It has a perfect sound." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Clara felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Let the Eleanor Hadleys of the world clutch their pearls and whisper behind their fans. Let the Mrs. Ashfords offer their condescending charity. She had Jake, she had this land, and she had her freedom fought for and won with her own 2 hands. Soon she'd have a new name, one she'd chosen, one that no law or gossip could take away. The old Clara Bennett had died on an auction block in Redemption Creek. The new Clara, soon to be Morrison, was a woman forged in fire, tested by drought and danger, and stronger for it all. And she was ready for whatever came next. Saturday dawned clear and bright, the first truly cool morning that heralded autumn's approach. Clara stood before the small mirror in Sarah's, now her room. Wearing the blue dress she'd altered for this day, Mary Patterson had brought over a veil that had been her own mother's, and Dr. Walsh's wife had contributed a small bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers.
"You look beautiful," Mary said, adjusting the veil. "Jake Morrison is a lucky man."
Clara smiled, though her stomach fluttered with nerves. Through the window, she could see townspeople arriving more than she'd expected. Some had come to celebrate, others undoubtedly to gawk at the spectacle of the auction bride wedding. Downstairs, Jake waited in his best suit, a string tie at his throat. When Clara descended the stairs, his eyes widened, and for a moment, neither could speak. "Ready?" he asked finally, offering his arm. "Ready?" The small church was packed. Clara kept her eyes forward as they walked down the aisle, but she couldn't miss the mixture of expressions: approval, disapproval, curiosity, and even some genuine joy. Reverend Mills stood at the altar, his kind face beaming. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice carrying clearly, "we gather today to witness the union of Jake Morrison and Clara Bennett, 2 souls who have found each other across trials that would have broken lesser spirits." Clara barely heard the familiar words, too lost in Jake's eyes, in the magnitude of this moment. 6 months ago, she'd stood on an auction block. Now she stood at an altar, choosing her own fate. If anyone has cause why these 2 should not be joined, speak now, or... The church doors burst open with a crash. Jed Hawkins strode in, flanked by 4 men, including the territorial deputy. Judge Carter followed, his black robes making him look like a carrion bird. "I object," Hawkins announced, savoring the gasps that rippled through the congregation. "This woman is property. Bought and paid for, she can't enter a legal marriage without her owner's consent." Jake stepped forward, hand moving toward where his gun would normally rest. "We've been through this, Hawkins." "Yes, we have." Judge Carter interjected smoothly, "Which is why I've brought a legal ruling." He produced a document. "The territorial court finds that the sale of Miss Bennett was legal and binding. As such, she remains property until such time as her debt is paid in full." "I paid $500, Jake began. "To an unauthorized seller," Carter continued. "Mr. Hawkins has presented proof of prior claim. Therefore, Miss Bennett belongs to him unless you can produce another $500 as proper compensation. The church erupted in shocked voices. Clara felt the world tilting, her worst nightmare coming true. After everything, to be declared property in front of the entire town. "This is an outrage," Reverend Mills thundered. "This is a house of God, not a slave market." "The law is the law," Carter replied coldly. Clara found her voice. "Then the law is wrong." She stepped forward, pulling off her veil with steady hands. "Judge Carter, Mr. Hawkins, everyone here listen carefully. I am not property. I have never been property, and I will die before I let you make me property again." "Brave words," Hawkins sneered. "But the law—" "The law," Clara's voice rose. "The same law that allowed innocent women to be captured and sold. The same law that lets men like you prey on the helpless." She turned to address the packed church. "Is this the territory we want to build where human beings can be bought and sold like cattle?" The girl has a point. Someone called out old Samuel Henderson, one of the town's founders. "This ain't right." "Right or wrong, it's legal," Judge Carter insisted. "Then we change what's legal," another voice said. "Doctor." Walsh stood up. "I've stayed quiet too long. This practice is a barbarism that has no place in a civilized territory." More voices joined in, arguments breaking out between those who supported the judge and those who backed Clara. Jake moved protectively closer to her as tensions rose. "Enough," Hawkins pulled out his gun. "Legal or not, she's coming with me." The church fell silent. Then, with a whisper of fabric, Clara saw movement throughout the congregation. Mary Patterson stood, and in her hand was a small derringer. Doctor Walsh's wife stood too, similarly armed, one by one. A dozen women rose, all holding weapons they'd hidden beneath shawls and in reticules. "No," Mary Patterson said clearly. "She's not." Hawkins stared in disbelief. "You'd threaten an officer of the court. We'd protect an innocent woman from slavery, Mrs. Walsh replied. Even Eleanor Hadley stood, though she held no weapon. "I may not approve of her past," she said stiffly, "but no woman deserves to be property." Judge Carter's face had gone pale. "This is rebellion. I'll have you all arrested." "With what army?" Jake asked quietly. He'd been silent during the confrontation, but now Clara saw why he'd been watching, counting. "Look around. Judge, you and Hawkins have 4 men? I count at least 30 who stand with Clara." It was true. Men and women throughout the church had risen, creating a protective wall between Clara and her would-be captors. Hawkins' face twisted with rage. "This isn't over. You can't guard her forever." "We won't have to," Reverend Mills said. "Because I'm finishing this ceremony right now. Jake Morrison, do you take Clara Bennett as your lawful wife?" "I do," Jake said firmly. "Clara Bennett, do you take Jake Morrison as your lawful husband?" "I do." Her voice rang clear and strong. "Then, by the power vested in me by God Almighty, and I'd like to see any earthly court challenge his authority, I pronounce you husband and wife." Jake pulled Clara into a kiss that was fierce and protective and triumphant all at once. The church erupted in cheers and applause that drowned out Hawkins's cursing. But the celebration was short-lived. As the crowd began to disperse, Hawkins caught Jake's arm. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed. "A piece of paper won't stop me." Jake's eyes were cold as winter. "No, but a bullet will. You come near my wife again. And judge or no judge, I'll put you in the ground." They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, but both knew the threat hadn't passed. That night, as Clara lay in Jake's arms for the first time, she could hear him listening to every sound in the darkness. "He'll come," she whispered. "I know." "Are you sorry for all the trouble I've brought?" Jake's arms tightened around her. "The only thing I'm sorry for is that you have to live with this fear. But Clara, you're worth any trouble. You're worth everything." They had 3 days of happiness, 3 days of being newlyweds, of Clara moving her few possessions into Jake's room, of shared meals and quiet evenings, and the simple joy of being together openly. On the 4th night, Hawkins came. Clara woke to the smell of smoke. "Jake." He was already up, grabbing his rifle. Through the window, they could see flames licking at the barn. The horses were screaming. "Stay here," Jake ordered. But Clara was already reaching for her own weapon. They rushed outside to find chaos. Hawkins and his men had set fires at multiple points the barn, the chicken coop, threatening the house itself. In the flickering light, Clara saw them driving off the cattle. "The horses!" Clara ran toward the barn. She could hear Buttercup, Sarah's gentle mare, trapped inside. "Clara, no!" But she was already plunging through the smoke, finding the terrified animals. She managed to free 2 before the heat drove her back, coughing and retching. Gunfire erupted. Jake had engaged Hawkins's men, trying to save what he could of their livelihood. Clara joined him, firing at the shadowy figures stealing their future. Then she saw Hawkins himself, torch in hand, heading for the house. "No," Clara intercepted him, and they grappled for the torch. Hawkins was stronger, but Clara fought with desperate fury. This was her home, her life, her freedom itself. The torch fell, rolling harmlessly into dirt. Hawkins struck Clara, sending her sprawling, and pulled his gun. "Should have come quietly," he snarled. The shot was impossibly loud, but it wasn't Hawkins's gun. It was Jake's rifle. Hawkins looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, surprise replacing cruelty on his face. He fell to his knees, then forward into the dust. Clara Jake was there, pulling her up, checking for injuries. "I'm all right. The fires." Together with the hands Jake had hired for protection, they fought the flames. By dawn, they'd saved the house and part of the barn, but the losses were devastating. Half the cattle gone, feed stores destroyed, equipment ruined. They stood in the smoky dawn, surveying the damage. Clara waited for despair to hit, but instead, she felt only determination. "We'll rebuild," she said. Jake looked at her soot-covered, exhausted, but unbroken. "Yes," he agreed. "We will." The sheriff arrived by noon, taking statements. With Hawkins dead and Judge Carter's corruption exposed, the legal threat died too. The territory would need new laws, better protections. It would take time, but change was coming. That evening, as they began the long work of cleaning up, neighbors arrived. The Pattersons, the Walshes, even the Hadleys bringing food, supplies, and willing hands. The same community that had whispered and judged now rallied to help. "Thank you," Clara said to Mary Patterson as they served food to the workers. "No," Mary replied firmly. "Thank you. You showed us what courage looks like, what standing up for what's right looks like." As the sun set on their first day of rebuilding, Clara stood with Jake overlooking their damaged but not defeated ranch. She thought of the journey that had brought her here from Philadelphia teacher to auction block to ranch wife. It hadn't been the path she'd chosen, but it had led her to become someone stronger than she'd ever imagined. "No regrets?" Jake asked, taking her hand. Clara squeezed back. "None. This is my home. You're my family, and we're free." The evening star appeared in the darkening sky, and Clara made a wish not for an easy life, but for the strength to face whatever came next, because she'd learned that freedom wasn't something given or sold or stolen. It was something you claimed with your own 2 hands and defended with every breath. And Clara Morrison, formerly Bennett, would never stop fighting for hers. Thank you for listening to this story of love and survival in the Wild West. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening while driving, relaxing at home, or perhaps during your commute? Please subscribe to our channel From Wild West and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and feedback mean the world to us.